This week on The Watchman, we are taking you inside one of the most overlooked but important sites in the entire Old Testament. These are the ancient ruins of Lachish, and for a time, it was the second largest city in the entire Judean kingdom, second only to Jerusalem. And that made it a prime target for the mighty Assyrian Empire. It's a story you may not have heard about, but you're going to hear about it today. We're joined by our good friend, Danny the Digger Herman, renowned archaeologist and tour guide, who tells us what the fall of Lachish at the hands of the Assyrian Empire meant for Jerusalem, for Israel, and for the Jewish people. Folks, this is a fascinating, untold story. You're going to hear about it today from Lachish. It's The Watchman. It's Christians United for Israel, only right here on TBN. Well, Danny the Digger, welcome back to The Watchman, my friend. And look, you always take us to some of the most fascinating archaeological, historical sites here in the land of Israel, the land of the Bible. But I am particularly excited today about where we are, Lachish. I would say, Danny, this is one of the more overlooked, but very, very important sites here in Israel. Tell us about this amazing place.
Yes, perhaps this is one of the most underestimated sites in Israel from ancient history. We've been to Masada. Crowds go there on a daily basis with the cable car. And something just as dramatic happened here 700 years earlier. Where are the crowds?
Yeah.
We are right in front of the very ramp that was created around the year 701 BC by the mighty Neo-Assyrian forces who were determined to conquer the second biggest city of the Judean Empire.
As you mentioned, Danny, this was the second largest city next to Jerusalem in the Judean kingdom. That's fascinating. Tell us a little bit about what Lachish looked like in that day. How many people lived here? This was a thriving center.
It is actually bigger than biblical Jerusalem. So we think that
Really?
maybe 10,000 people settled here. There were also a lot of farms around. The vineyards that you see to this day were also probably the landscape and the main economical drive in this area, as well as trade. The international highway, the Via Maris, passing not so far away from here.
And what is that? When you say the international highway, what do you mean by that?
The ancient Near East developed along big rivers. The pharaohs in Egypt along the Nile, and the Akkadian cultures along the Mesopotamia, along the area between the Mesopotamos, the two rivers, Tigris and Euphrates.
Modern day Iraq.
Modern day Iraq and Syria.
Yeah.
And these two big global forces would interact with one another, either trade or battle, and this land is in the middle.
This is really, Lachish is at a crossroads.
At the very junction of a very important international highway system by ancient terms. The Israelites really settled here on an intense level from the 9th century, 8th century, but then in 701, the Neo-Assyrian Empire, after conquering and exiling all the tribes of the north, the Israelites, Sennacherib's eyes are on the southern area.
Right.
Jerusalem is the capital, but Lachish is the real economical center as well as trade center.
Yeah. For our viewers, Danny, give us a little bit of background on the Assyrians, King Sennacherib. This was, in its day, 7th century, thereabouts, 6th, 7th century. This was the powerhouse in the Middle East, right? Tell us a little bit about the Assyrian Empire.
They are a force established again along the Tigris and the Euphrates. The Iraq of today, Baghdad of today would be then Nineveh.
Biblical city of Nineveh.
Yeah, which Jonah took 3 days to cross according to the biblical account. Sennacherib ruling in that part establishes a power that is equivalent to what the Roman Empire will later be. Okay, it's the first imperial power that just goes against all its frontiers and crushes any resistance and enslaves the people with extreme brutality. Tiglath-Pileser and Sargon have conquered the northern area. Sennacherib is the next generation. His eyes is really towards Egypt.
And that's where the 10 lost tribes of Israel came from, by the way. The Assyrians carted off the northern tribes, the 10 lost tribes of Israel.
And we lost them.
Yeah.
We don't know. We don't have any Ephraimites or Menashites walking among us today.
Yeah, so now Sennacherib, the 10 tribes, the northern part of the land of Israel is conquered. Now he is turning his sights towards the south, and that's where Lachish comes in.
He wants to get both a hold of this region and open as well the region for continuing to Egypt. The main goal is Egypt. There's a lot more wealth in Egypt that he wishes to capture, and Lachish is in the way. Lachish must be taken.
Must be taken.
So in 701 BC, we have it very well documented, mostly by Sennacherib. The Bible only hints to this campaign. He comes with his forces and he camps and besieges the city. He makes a ramp that will be built against one of its corners, and eventually he conquers it. We know this from archaeology, not from the Bible, but not local archaeology. It's finds that were made in Nineveh in the 19th century. And after the finds were made there, then local archaeologists here started asking, where did it happen? And eventually we found out right here.
Wow.
You are looking at the very ramp that the Assyrians built against where the flag of Israel is today. And we have here stones that are like the size of tennis balls from the slingshots. We found countless arrowheads, helmet decorations, okay? There was a fierce battle at this very place, which is now nice and quiet.
You had mentioned on our way over that King Sennacherib may have actually been here at the siege of Lachish, the powerful king of the Assyrian Empire.
Yeah, he personally led his forces.
So he was here, he personally led his forces.
I think he camped over there. This is like a hill viewing the site.
Yes.
And if this is the place of the ramp, then he probably sat and commanded and monitored that it's done properly.
Sennacherib is here, he's camped out. What does he see? What is going on here?
Two sets of walls around the top of the mound. He sees a gate complex over here, which is always the most vulnerable part of the site. But that gate is a very well designed with two actual gates and a killing zone in the middle. He knows that attacking from the gate might put him into a trap. He chooses the spot where the hill around the mountain is not as steep, and his soldiers then start putting a lot of stones. Look, we found them. A lot of beaten earth and stones and a fill to eventually create a ramp that will enable battering ram to pound against the wall.
Very similar to Masada.
Very similar story, and even a more heroic one, because at Masada at the end they committed suicide. Here it seems that they battled till the bitter end, and we have found archaeological evidence of apparently those who lost in battle. We found two caves filled with skulls, meaning whoever they captured, they chopped their heads off and someone later piled it into a cave in the city.
Look, we had fierce Jewish Israelite resistance here to this siege, but I imagine once the Assyrians broke through, it had to be bloody and there had to be a lot of carnage.
Yes, level 3 in Lachish, the destruction level caused by Sennacherib and his Assyrian forces, is a very clear, thick layer of dark ash and total destruction. They really wiped out the Jewish resistance here. This was probably a major trauma for the whole region. On the other hand, Sennacherib failed to conquer the capital. Jerusalem itself was saved.
Up next, how did Jerusalem survive the brutal Assyrian onslaught? Hear the miraculous story after the break.
Israel faces growing threats on all sides. Hezbollah, ISIS, Iran, and Hamas never cease their attacks. But God has raised Kufi up at this moment in history to stand between Israel and those who seek to destroy the Jewish state.
Israel's enemies are on the move. As dark clouds gather on the horizon, tell the world you proudly stand with Israel. Be a courageous voice for biblical unity and moral clarity when you join Christians United for Israel. Show your love for the people of Zion with this beautiful symbol of unending support for Israel.
Wear the pen and join Kufi, a movement of over 3.5 million defenders of Israel. Call the number on your screen or visit kufi.org/pen to receive your free pin that will show your proud support for the special bond between Israel and America.
Danny, you've described the bloody siege here by the Assyrians at Lachish. Now we are standing at the very spot where all of that went down. Tell us about what happened at this spot.
In the back here, you can see the top of the wall peeking beyond the debris. More of it probably runs just beneath our feet. You can imagine the Judeans here terrified as they're seeing the Assyrians advancing with their battering ram. This is the very place where Lachish was taken.
And that battering ram, the intimidation factor as well with those battering rams.
Yes, and people that are captured in the battle are impaled, presented in front of the defenders. This was a very, very big tragedy from a Judean point of view.
Yeah, big victory for Sennacherib, as you explained. He was gloating about the conquest of Lachish, but then the Assyrians sent a contingent and set their targets on Jerusalem. What came next?
On the capital, okay? Number one. This is number two. And the amazing twist in this story is that Jerusalem is actually saved. Sennacherib accounts that he goes against Jerusalem and he tells us that Hezekiah, the king of the Jews, who did not submit to my yoke, I locked him like a bird in a cage. But he doesn't say what happens next. He doesn't say how it ends. And the Bible tells us indeed that Jerusalem was spared. An angel of God attacked the Assyrian forces, caused a plague. 185,000 soldiers are dead. That sounds a bit like an exaggeration, but something did happen to the Assyrian army so badly that Sennacherib decided to spare Jerusalem.
Wow, he abandoned that siege of Jerusalem. The angel of the Lord, God Almighty, the God of Israel, intervened according to the Bible. Jerusalem was spared, and then some good things happened under Hezekiah. Tell us about that.
Hezekiah, as a result, apparently recognizes the supremacy of God and enforces the religion of the God of Jerusalem, and any traces left of worship of Baal and Asherah are moved away.
Wow. So he moves against the pagan shrines in Israel. It's almost a revival of sorts, Danny, here in the land of Israel under King Hezekiah, after Jerusalem is spared.
Yes, monotheism is crystallized in the context of the events of 701 BC.
Wow. And you believe this is one of the most pivotal events in Jewish history, how Jerusalem escaped the Assyrians. Tell us why.
This is when Jerusalem becomes a central city with a single worship. There are no more additional worship areas. And even here in Lachish, we found evidence of an altar gone out of use, and a toilet seat is put next to it. Apparently that area became some sort of a public latrine.
Wow. That's what they thought of Baal and Baal worship at that point. So the Israelites had a reprieve. After Jerusalem was spared under the Assyrians, there was a reprieve, and then eventually the Babylonians came. Jerusalem was eventually conquered sometime later.
130 years later, the Babylonians will return to this area. They will conquer again Lachish. There was a stronghold rebuilt around the gate area, and they will also reach and conquer Jerusalem.
You know the great thing about it, Danny, though, is that I don't see an Assyrian flag here in Lachish. I don't see a Babylonian flag in Jerusalem. I see this flag, the flag of Israel and the Star of David behind me, and that's a wonderful thing. The God of Israel is moving in these Bible times we are living in today.
We'll head back to Lachish a bit later in the show, but up next, Danny the Digger takes us on a fascinating tour of the Israel Museum in Jerusalem. From the Dead Sea Scrolls to King David to Pontius Pilate, you're about to see firsthand archaeological evidence for the truth of the Bible. Do not move.
With over 3.5 million members, Christians United for Israel is the largest pro-Israel organization in America. And for Zion's sake, we will not remain silent. We won't stand for the lies and political attacks that threaten Israel's safety and the future of the Jewish people in their God-given homeland. We want you to join us in this sacred movement.
The Jewish people are not alone. Christians United for Israel, I want to thank you for standing up for Israel. I want to thank you for standing up and being counted. May God bless you all. Thank you.
Israel needs you to take a stand. Join Christians United for Israel. Make your voice heard and be remembered as a defender of Israel, the apple of God's eye.
And welcome back. Folks, we're heading back to Lachish a bit later, but up first, our good friend Danny the Digger Herman takes us on a fascinating tour through biblical history at the Israel Museum. You are about to see the Bible come to life before your very eyes with some of the world's most legendary archaeological discoveries. Danny, take it away.
Hi, Eric. After some persuasion, we actually managed to get a permit to film in the most significant display of archaeological find made in the Holy Land, the Israel Museum. I'm in the capital of the state of Israel in Jerusalem. The Parliament building, the Knesset, is behind me, and I'm on top of the display of a 2,000-year-old manuscripts, the Dead Sea Scrolls. But I want to start in the archaeological wing, where you can see on display items related to the Canaanites, the Philistines, King David. A fundamental question for evaluating the Bible for modern reader with science and technology at hand is whether these biblical accounts are valid. Can we find evidence? Can we find architecture from the Iron Age, from the time of the United Monarchy? Can we find evidence of David and Solomon and Ahab and Hezekiah? Well, since the 19th century, various expeditions have been excavating in different sites across the land, but only in the 1990s did we finally find, for the first and only time to this day, an inscription to mention David. An inscription to mention David as a founder of a dynasty that is the enemy of some Aramaic king who have conquered the north and placed this inscription. Another sensational discovery that one can see here at the Israel Museum is an artifact that was originally found in a cave like this in a hill overlooking Mount Zion in Jerusalem. Uncovered in the 1980s, it proved to be a burial cave of wealthy Jews. These are the original pots that were found in the burial cave, and around the corner one can see the jewelry, silver necklaces, Phoenician glass bits. But one of those items proved to be extremely important when it was unwrapped in the laboratories of the Israel Museum. A careful look at this, playing with the angles of the light, indicated that there's writing on it. And the writing turns out to be a quote from the book of Numbers. The Lord bless you and protect you. The Lord deal kindly and graciously with you. The Lord bestow his favor upon you and grant you peace. יברכך אדוני וישמרך, יאר אדוני פניו אליך ויחונך, יישא אדוני פניו אליך וישם לך שלום. This text is said to this day by priests in Jewish synagogues. The Israel Museum also presents a wealth of finds from the Second Temple period, the period of the return of the Jews from Babylonian exile, the rebuild of Jerusalem and its temple, and burials of Jews from that time are on display here. But for a Christian visitor of the Israel Museum, this part presents the three most significant items that relate to Jesus himself. In the center, we have here a plaque originally found in Caesarea in the 1960s that documents the creation of a shrine for Tiberius. The constructor of it is Us Pilatus. The beginning is missing, but it's probably Pontius Pilatus, Pontius Pilate, the governor of Judea. The governor of Judea, but also the judge, the person who judged Jesus. And this is, to this day, the only time his name is found in an inscription. On the left, one can see a bone box that was used for secondary burial in that time frame of Jesus. It's very nicely decorated. It must be of a person of a high class. And indeed, the inscription engraved on the side indicates it's the tomb of Yehosef Bar Kaifa. This is Caiaphas, the high priest that interrogated Jesus. And on the right side, one can see another bone box of obviously someone of a lower class. We only know his name, Yehochanan, son of Chagakol. We know nothing about him from any historical document, but the reason it's such an important discovery is because among the bones found inside that bone box, one bone, a heel bone, was found with a nail piercing it. This is evidence of crucifixion, and the only evidence ever found in the whole Roman Empire for crucifixion. One of the unique features here at the Israel Museum that relates to the artifacts we saw in the archaeological display, items relating to Jesus, is this model, a 1:50 scale model of Jerusalem, a presumed image of the city some 2,000 years ago in the days of Jesus. In the heart of it stood the temple in full glory, and millions of Jews coming from all over the world would come here to offer sacrifices in front of the building that in the days of Solomon held the Ark of the Covenant. And yet this sacrificial activity was held by a group of priests, Kohanim, that were operating this in a monopolistic and corrupted way. And one of the few people that dared speaking against them was Jesus. Another group that we know about them now, only in modern times, was a group calling itself the Yachad, who decided to replace the sacrificial activity by going to the desert and living a spiritual lifestyle that involves prayers. This group created a library, but eventually they had to hide that library because the Romans were advancing, and that library was left there for 2,000 years until our times. These are the famous Dead Sea Scrolls. Such an amazing discovery that has a special display here at the Israel Museum, the Shrine of the Book. The Dead Sea Scrolls are truly a spectacular discovery, the dream of any archaeologist. The first of them were found by two Bedouins in a natural cavity above the Dead Sea. And in the following decade, in a total of 11 caves, some 16,000 scrolls and thousands of scrolls were uncovered. The study of them, piecing all of the fragments together, was a long process that was really completed just a decade ago. And the exclusive exhibition of the scrolls is in this part of the Israel Museum called the Shrine of the Book. What a unique, timeless-like architectural design. The Shrine of the Book houses a selection of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Here, for instance, one can see a mysterious depiction of a futuristic war between sons of light and sons of darkness. But you also have here copies of the Old Testament, interpretation on the Old Testament, hymns and prayers that this community created and followed, and the most significant scroll, the community rule, a selection of codes and rules that one must follow if it wants to join these people who call themselves the Yachad. And what's interesting is that these rules are strikingly similar to one figure from the New Testament, John the Baptist. They both resented the temple, they both went to the desert, they both expected the end of days to come soon. The Dead Sea Scrolls with John the Baptist are in a way the cradle of Christianity.
Thanks again to Danny the Digger for that amazing tour of the Israel Museum. Up next, we head back to Lachish for my final thoughts on the incredible resilience of Israel and the Jewish people. Only God. Stick around.
Long before he was the Vice President of the United States, Mike Pence was a friend to Christians United for Israel. Now, he's helping us make Israel stronger and her people safer.
Pastor John Hagee, I thank you for your leadership on behalf of this nation and the Jewish state of Israel. And today, through Christians United for Israel, more than 3.3 million believers have raised their voices, have not been silent in support of Israel. And you can be heard in every city and town across America and in every office on Capitol Hill. And rest assured, the man down the street at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue hears you too. I have faith that with God's help, and with the men and women gathered here, the best days for Israel and for America are yet to come.
Don't miss next year's summit. Join the movement and register now for the 2018 CUFI Washington Summit.
And welcome back to the Watchman from the ancient ruins of Lachish. I want to thank once again our good friend Danny the Digger Herman for an amazing history lesson of this site. And folks, when I think of Lachish, I think of a situation where God Almighty turned tragedy into triumph. Yes, Lachish fell and it was a bloody siege and a major setback, but Jerusalem was spared and a revival was sparked in the land under King Hezekiah. But look, all looked lost here at Lachish. But that wasn't the first time in the past 2,700 years that all looked lost for Israel and the Jewish people. All looked lost under the Babylonians, under the Romans, under the Ottomans, under the Nazis. But fast forward, what is standing behind me? Not the flag of Assyria here in Lachish, it's the flag of the state of Israel. You know why, folks? God Almighty, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of Israel, keeps his promises. In the book of Ezekiel and in many other places throughout the Bible, God Almighty says, I will bring you from the nations where you were scattered, and I will bring you back. Guess what? It happened. The Jewish people, the people of Israel live. They are back, never to be scattered again, and that includes right here in Lachish. So join our movement here at Christians United for Israel so we can bring you these great stories on a regular basis here on the Watchman Show. You see the URL, you see the phone number on your screen. Call, visit the website, and join us. We're America's largest pro-Israel organization, folks. Over 3 million members nationwide, growing every day, bringing you the truth about the land of Israel for such a time as this. Well, thanks for joining us this week from the amazing site of Lachish. Until next time, God bless you. And remember, never hold your peace.